Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Just waiting. Hine ma tovu manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tovu manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tov, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tovu manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine ma tovu manayim, shevet achim gam yachad.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Good Shabbos, and a special thank you to Roberta and Lauren, who are going to be leading services along with our rabbinic intern, Art Grand, and myself tonight. Beautiful opening song, and we're looking forward to leading services with you, and it's good to see all of you after this rainy week, rainy and a little bit cold, but you know we need the rain, of course. We're going to, before we begin the service, a special shout out to my friend and colleague on the Napa Interfaith Clergy Council, Reverend Pete Shaw, who I'm going to be introducing a little bit later and who's going to be speaking with me after the service tonight. So glad you're with us, Pete. I'd like to invite Linda Miller to come up to the bima to light our Shabbat candles, and you can follow the blessing on page 120.
Okay, I like this.
Good.
Oh, sorry. It's, you know what? It's the wick.
I would just use a match.
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
There we go.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat.
We're going to continue on page 142 with the singing of Shalom Alechem. Roberta and Lauren.
Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Mihi Melech, Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Melchem L'Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Mihi Melech, Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Arhuni L'Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Mihi Melech, Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Sechem Shalom, Malachei HaShalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech Malachei HaMelachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
And now that we have now that we have welcomed the Sabbath angels to sit among us in our congregation on this Friday night, as we have done for the last 4 or 5 centuries, we're going to turn to page 146 for our call to worship the Baruch Hu. And I'd like to ask you all, if you're able to please rise, and for Art to come up to the bima.
Baruch Hu et Adonai Hamavarach, Baruch Hu et Adonai Barach Le'olam Va'ed, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam, Asher Baruch Banu Mitzvot Ha'amim, V'natan Lanu et Torato, Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
You're making me feel comfortable, thank you.
We continue on, are you going to do the English or the Hebrew?
Yeah, we'll do the English.
Page 149.
Together. Blessed are you, Adonai our God, ruler of the universe, who speaks the evening into being, skillfully opens gates, thoroughly alters the time and changes of the season, and arranges the stars in their heavenly courses according to plan. You are creator of day and night, rolling dark light away from darkness and darkness from light, transforming day into night and distinguishing one from the other. Adonai Tzivaot is your name. Ever-living God, may you reign continually over us unto eternity.
Blessed
are you, Adonai, who brings on the evening. Baruch atah Adonai, Ha'ma'ariv Aravim. On the bottom of 151. Wisdom and wonder, passion and instructions, story and symbol, all these things your Torah gives us. And the more we devote ourselves to it, the more it grows and gives. Would ye true token, abiding love,
Then this
this
holiest of your
works,
works, and the living language that gives it form.
form. Baruch atah Adonai, Ohev Amo Yisrael.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem, Kevod Malchuto, Le'olam Va'ad. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך,
ושיננתם לבניך ודרת בם. שבתך בביתך ובלסתך בדרך, שפך ובקומך, וקשרתם להיות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובישעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי. אתם קדושים לאלוהיכם, אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם אלוהים, אני אדוני אלוהיכם. Page 159. Please join me. Sing the song of men and women, join in understanding and respect, the song of God's miracles, an earth protected and cherished,
a gift for our children and the generations to come. The song of a land once ravished by war, now quiet and content. Her soldiers home, to leave no more. The song of a world redeemed, the song of peace. Please turn to page 161.
On the top of the page, let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Adonai, help us to walk with good companions, to live with hope in our hearts and eternity in our thoughts. When we lie down in peace, rise up again to do your will.
Baruch atah
Adonai,
Haporei Sukkot Shalom,
Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'al Yerushalayim.
Please turn to 160 for Hashkivenu. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom, l'shalom. V'chamidenu shomreinu l'chayim. Ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha, ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha. Amen. Shelter us beneath your wings, O Adonai. Guard us from all harmful things, O Adonai. Keep us safe throughout the night, till we wake with morning's light. Teach us, God, wrong from right. Amen. 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 Amen.
Please take a moment now for your own silent thoughts and prayers.
Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Chen v'chesed, chen v'chesed v'rachamim. Chen v'chesed, chen v'chesed v'rachamim. V'rachamim, sim shalom. Tova uvracha, sim shalom, tova uvracha. Aleinu ve'akol Yisrael. Aleinu ve'akol Yisrael. Amecha. Sim shalom, tova uvracha. Sim shalom, tova uvracha.
At this point in our service, we think of those in need of healing on this Shabbat, healing of body, healing of spirit, and healing of heart. And we ask God to bestow the bracha, the blessing of a fuah shlema, full and complete healing on the following men and women from our community or those known and loved by our CBS family. Ilana Massey, Kevin Brackett, Michelle Camisia, Joshua Hyman, Diane Butler, Jesse Friedman, Marjorie Gilberg, Michael Blend, Jim Mates, Janet Marbury, Brenda Flood, Bill Lenish, Sharon Blevis, Joan Elson, Alan Goldstein, Sherry Cohos, Lynn McManus, Walter Wilmert, Gail Showley, Jerry Mautner, Kirk Whitlatch, Bunny Goldstein, Barbara Cosson, Etta Kessler, David Rabb, Jensen Beach, and Carl Smith. And if anyone has a name they'd like to add to the list, please do so. The Misha Berach is on page 511.
Sheberach Avoteinu Mikor Avraham Limotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misheberach imotenu mikor Avraham Avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
The Aleinu is on page 586. Art, would you mind opening the ark for us? And if you're able, please rise.
Take the Dulav Bereshit, Shelo Asanu Kivaratzot, Velo Samanu Kunishbahot Adama, Shelo Sam Chelkenu Kahem, Vegor Aleinu Kechol Hamonam, Vanachnu Korim, Umishtachavim Umodim, Lifnei Melech, Malchei HaMlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'ne'emar, V'haya Adonai, V'melech ha'kol ha'aretz, V'yom ha'hu, Yeh Adonai echad, U'shemo echad.
Please be seated.
To see those beautiful mantles under the two little toys. I'll never forget that. Beautiful.
As we near the end of our service, before we introduce our guest speaker, We have some important announcements to share with you tonight. And for that, I'd like to invite up board member Naomi Petrick to do us that honor. Shabbat Shalom.
This Saturday, the second of the two Service 101 sessions with Rabbi Goldstein is at 10:30 a.m. And CBS
Shakshuka.
Thank you, Teens Movie Night will be at CBS from 6 to 8 p.m. Monday the 13th, join us for the wrap-up session of the Talking Jewish Tribe at 10 a.m. around the topic, what has been your experience with congregation membership and what are you looking for in congregation? Wednesday the 15th, Your Right to Resilience will meet at 6:30 p.m. Sunday, March 19th, Rabbi will be ready at 9:30 a.m. for coffee and chat. Come by to have a friendly morning chat with a warm cup of caffeine. March 22nd at 7 p.m., join in Judaism Tribes Get Together with Joel Hoychuk for creme brulee. Scholar in Residence weekend is coming. We are thrilled to have Jordan B. Gorfinkel, affectionately called Gorf, coming to CBS for Friday, March 24th and Saturday, March 25th. Gorf is a cartoonist, musician, producer, and director. For nearly a decade, Gorf managed a team of writers, artists, and creators on the Batman franchise for DC Comics, producing more than 2,000 stories in multiple mediums. Learn how Jewish superheroes are. Much better. RSVP online and look for more details via email. We will be there.
Good.
Just to let you know. March 27th at CBS. At 6:30 p.m., the Investment Oversight Committee invites you to the planned Giving Learning Experience. At 7 p.m. on Zoom, Soul Sisters Book Club will discuss Becoming Eve, My Journey from Ultra-Orthodox Rabbi to Transgendered Woman by Chava Stein. A few big save-the-date items. The CBS catered second night Pesach Seder is back. You can register now online by contacting Lauren in the synagogue office. Adults are 65, teens 35, and kids 12 and younger are free. And it's time to celebrate CBS's 70th anniversary. We will be celebrating at summer, but kick off with a 3-day weekend, May 19th, 20th, and 21st. Phew, okay. We'd like to give warm birthday wishes and anniversary wishes. Happy birthday to Eyal Kaduri and Jason Kreese. Happy anniversary to Mark and Sylvia Samrick, 55 years. And that's it. It's like, not up here. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Naomi. Yeah, 55 years. They have to tell the rest of us how they did it. That's pretty good. But I think we have people who've been married here for longer than that. Before we switch gears and turn to the Kaddish, I want to offer a special thank you first to Art for leading services with us tonight. I know that Art is going to be leading a Shabbat service in the weeks ahead by himself, along with Gordon. So I know there wasn't a lot to do tonight, but you'll have plenty more when you lead the service by yourself. And a special thank you to Roberta and Lauren for doing the music tonight. I knew you were both talented. I didn't know how talented, and so while we miss Gordon, I am so grateful for your voice and your talent and your time, so thank you. We're going to shift gears now and turn to the Mourner's Kaddish. And we are going to think of those who are no longer with us, those who have died both recently and in seasons past, known and loved by our community or from our community. We remember those who have died during the past 12 months. Dean Wilson, Norman Charney, David Alpert, Renee Munoz, Michael Kossin, Paul Jaworski, Ed Eston, Micah Bisel, Jill Daly Katz, Gabriel Harrison Escalera, Colonel Ed West, Joe McCaffrey, Beverly Eigner, Ruth Morlett, Lords Blake, Othello Thornton, Alan Rosen, Fred Goldman, Ann Rapson, Bob Massey, and Lucille Posner. And we also honor the yard sites, the anniversaries of the deaths of Carol Bien, Sarah Cohan, James Brady, Mardell Reese Rome, Jeannie Goodwin, George Gordon, Rosalind Kaufman Johnson, Evelyn Gilbert, Jackie Suri Yentl Hecht, Peter Gordon, William Rosenblatt, Martha Turner, Eudice Kazakin Feingold, Ruth Sandra Wolstein, and Eileen Herman. And if anyone has a name of a loved one that they'd like to share, I invite you to please do so. The mourner's cottage is on page 598. If you are able, please rise. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah b'alma divrach herete v'yamlik malchute b'chayechon v'yomechon uv'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael b'gala v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam olamei maya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei dekudsha b'riku Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tishbechata v'nechemata, damiran ba'alma v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shmaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May the source of peace send peace to all those in mourning and comfort to all those who are bereaved. And let us all say, amen. Please be seated. We have our final song. We're going to do the Kiddush and Motzi at the very end after I invite Pete up here. What are we going to close with tonight?
We thought we'd close with Oseh Shalom
Okay.
on page 180. On the bottom.
Oseh Shalom b'imromav, hu yaseh Shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael ve'yimeru amen. Oseh Shalom b'imromav, hu yaseh Shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael ve'yimeru amen. Oseh.
Do it again? No. Once is fine. Once is fine.
Okay. Thank you. I think Gordon does a different melody, but sometimes he does that one. Sometimes he does. Thank you. And thank you again for leading music. So we did a bit of an abbreviated service tonight because we are continuing our series, Faces of Faith. This is going to be our last one for this season. We've had two other speakers come in, leaders of the Napa faith community. And tonight is not only one of the longtime leaders of Napa's religious community, but also a friend of mine. In fact, we just had dinner a few weeks ago, I think, with some of your congregants. Pete Shaw is the pastor at Crosswalk Community Church. I think many of you know about Crosswalk. Under Pete's leadership, they have done so much for Napa Valley over the years, during the fires when we first moved here, and whenever there is some need in the community, whether it is related to a natural disaster or just groups that need a place to meet, Pete and Crosswalk have always been such a great venue. We've done some programs there. I've spoken there. On some of you from CBS I know have been there or know Pete. I first met Pete 6 years ago on the Napa Interfaith Clergy Council, and we've been friends ever since. So Pete has an interesting background. He's done some very interesting things with that congregation. And Pete, I'd like to invite you to come up to our bima so we can engage in a little bit of dialogue, and then we're going to open up the floor for you to ask questions. So why don't you sit right here?
Thank you.
So I want to start, Pete. I know a fair amount about you, but one of the things I don't know and that often gets asked of me is why did you decide to become a pastor in the first place? I think many of our members of our community would like to just hear sort of a short version of that. Why did you decide to become a pastor, and how did you know which denomination you wanted to be ordained in?
Yeah. Is my mic working out there?
Yeah.
Okay. So, my father and both of my grandfathers were pastors in the same tradition, same denomination. They never said anything to me about becoming a pastor, which I probably should have taken to heart. The summer before my sophomore year of high school, there was just something within me that resonated with ministry, and American Baptist is who we are. We're kind of the friendly Baptist in the United States, and that was home to me, and I have a deep, deep heritage with that denomination, so that was clearly where I was going to go for my undergraduate, my graduate work, all the way through. So that's where we are today, and Crosswalk is still, technically we are the First Baptist Church of Napa, but we changed the name on our shingle in 2008 to Crosswalk Community Church because of some of the baggage with that word Baptist in our country, which grieves me a little bit because I have a different perspective on what Baptist is supposed to be, but we needed to do it, and it was a good move for us.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that? I was ordained in '94, so I've been a rabbi now 29 years, which is mind-blowing to me. How long have you been ordained?
Since '95.
So we're about the same
right.
in age and in experience.
Yeah.
I know from our conversations that when you came to Napa, which was how many years ago?
Came in 99.
99. When you came here, Crosswalk was a very different entity, a very different community, and you have really, as a very forward-thinking faith leader, pushed your congregation in a lot of different ways. Could you talk a little bit about some of the challenges you've faced in your career as a pastor generally, but also specifically some of the ways in which you have sort of changed the culture of Crosswalk or pushed them to think about Christianity in a different way? Or Protestant Christianity.
Right. When I came to Napa, the church was at a real difficult time in their life cycle. They had gone through two major crises, one in the late 80s and another in the 90s, and it really decimated the church. So the average age of the church when I came was 70 years old, and the congregation was dwindling. The facility was not in good shape. It was kind of a time capsule to 1969, which is great for 1969, but not so good for 1999. And it was a very, very conservative church. Fundamentalism and evangelicalism are deeply related. And so they were a conservative, fundamentalist / evangelical church. Their form of worship had not progressed with time as some other churches had. So that's what I came to. I'd had some experience in helping a church through a transition like this in Illinois, about 100 miles south of Chicago, where I did my MDiv. So that kind of got me on their radar. And so when I came, they made a really bold, courageous move. I was 29 years old. I had a 6-month and a 2.5-year-old in tow with my wife, Lynn. And they invited me out and gave me carte blanche to do whatever we needed to do to help the church see a new day. And they meant it. They also hated it because everything we did was foreign to them. And literally everything has changed at the church in 23 and a half years, from the color of the building to the way and the look and the feel of the space for worship, to what we do with our campus, to our theology. It was a very conservative theology, and now we're one of the most progressive Christian churches in Napa. And that has been a difficult shift. You can imagine how disconcerting that is when people who are used to hearing things a certain way and confident, certain about some interpretations, and then some kid comes along and says, well, we should probably look at the context of this particular scripture and wonder what that means for us today, and let's look at the meaning of this word. And even if the academics are accurate, it doesn't completely cancel out the emotional weight of some of these beliefs. So, you know, I've shared it with you, but the first few years in this church were extremely difficult, and I was fried, and I wanted to quit. But I'd worked on my doctor of ministry for a few years, and I didn't want to give up on that. So I decided to use my doctoral work as my litmus test. Do I stay in ministry or not? And instead of it sending me to the door, it actually really reinvigorated my faith and my way of thinking. But what it also did for me is it opened my eyes to all that I didn't know, that I thought I knew. Didn't even know to ask certain questions about things. And so I just came back excited to share this with the congregation and point out some words that they were very confident meant one thing and let them know, no, actually it means something entirely different. And some of those, which I looked at as really good news, were some of the most offensive sermons I've ever given, and people left in droves. So we've been this really interesting congregation that has been fluid, and on paper, you know, we're in a very stable, strong place now, and I feel really good about our ethos and where we're at. But it was a total shift throughout the years of people coming in who are resonating with a different way of thinking about what it means to be a faith community, different interpretation of sacred text, and as many as people would come, we'd also say goodbye to some folks that it didn't fit so well with anymore. So that's been our journey. It's been very difficult. COVID was not easy. You know, we don't have a large staff at all, so a lot was thrown on my shoulders. I was supposed to go on sabbatical in the summer of 2020 and had to cancel all my plans, and it was really, really hard. And so we got through COVID. Everybody just had to do more, and frankly, when we reopened, I was absolutely fried and had to take a month off, seriously. Like a counselor said, if you don't take time off right now, you're not going to last. And so I did, and that probably saved my ministry. So grateful I did that, and then finally took sabbatical this past summer, which was great.
You know, Pete, I want to ask you about your sabbatical, but first I want to go back for a second. You were talking about some of the ways in which you changed some of the, shifted some of the thinking at Crosswalk over the years. What were some of the hot button issues in your particular congregation or in your denomination that really struck you? You know, was it reproductive rights, race, social justice? What were some of the, you know, the way of reading scripture? What were some of the hot button issues?
Well,
I mean, I know for us, Israel is a big one, especially now.
Right.
But I'm curious what some of your hot button issues were.
Yeah, well, some had to do with how they viewed our space. It's our campus, you know, it's our facility. And so some of it were just sort of like, who are we inviting in here? Because when I came, the church was open like 2 hours a week. Now, they'd had other great seasons in the life of the church, so I don't mean to disparage any of that. But because we'd gone through crisis, the church was open for an hour and a half on Sunday morning and an hour and a half on Wednesday night. And that was it. And not too many people coming. And we just started asking the question, what does it mean to serve the community? So one hot button really had to do with who are these people who are invading our campus? And it started off very small, just recovery groups needing space. And now we have 42 different recovery groups that are just flowing in and out all week long, multiple groups using our gym. And the place is just constantly busy, which is wonderful. And it all started with one yes that led to another yes, the evacuation stuff. So that's one of those things where we had to get comfortable viewing our space differently. And as an illustration, one of our AA groups, which meets in our fireside room, they were outgrowing that room. They needed a space that could hold more than like 50, 60 people. And we're thinking about our gym, but it's really echoey and it's not very warm and friendly. So Dar, our executive pastor, will never forget this conversation, comes and says, well, what should we do? And should we allow them to meet in our sanctuary? And the preacher's kid in me was like, well, that's sacred space. You can't do that. And that lasted for both of us about 5 seconds. And we both just said, well, of course. These people are seeking healing. What better place than to invite them in our sanctuary? But that was a real challenge for people. What if they wrecked the place? And frankly, we've never really had any problems. I have a different sensory memory now of stale cigarette smoke because smoking is really common for people in recovery, and it comes with them, you know. I've never heard more F-bombs said out loud in our church since they've come, and now I hear it and I just smile because it means that we're a place for people who are looking for healing. Theologically or social issues, you can imagine what the biggest ones are in our culture are the ones that are also really difficult for the church. So starting early on with gender equality, that was tough for some of our folks to understand and appreciate, so some left on that. Changing the name of the church, which was a missional move to become more of a service-oriented congregation for the community. That word Baptist was either a speed bump or a complete stop for folks who just wouldn't even consider us. So Crosswalk kind of softened that. Then once they're there and they like us, then they figure out that we're Baptist and they're okay with it. So that's how that usually works. LGBTQ rights and inclusion, did a couple teachings on that to sort of state our position. And the last one I did that really defined that and has maintained ever since was about 9 years ago. And that one, at that time, most of the church was really for it. As I like to say in both of our services, I got a standing ovation, but then some of the people just kept on standing and walked out and never came back. So we lost 20 families or something off that, which was painful. I never like when that happens, but with every one of these things, and now with racial equity and equality, that's another hot button thing that we look at that and really believe that God created everyone, and Shalom is for everybody and should dictate how we treat everybody, and that's hard for some people. But we've weathered the storms, and we're, like I said, I think we're where we're going to be. We're always going to try to be responsive to what we sense God calling us to do. But I don't see us changing a lot now because I don't know what that could possibly mean.
I want to now go back to the sabbatical. Tonight is Shabbat, and the word sabbatical comes from Sabbath, and it's supposed to be like the Sabbath, a time to renew, a time to restore. I have my first sabbatical coming up. You just finished yours. I didn't realize that there had been a delay. I had forgotten about that. Would you say you're in a different place now, having just had your sabbatical, and if so, in what way?
Yeah. Sabbatical was critical for my capacity to grow and to move forward. Sabbatical is not vacation. It is a deep, deep rest. We're on 24/7. Shabbat comes with incredible frequency for you.
Every week.
Yeah, and so half my time is constantly thinking, all right, what am I gonna say? What are we gonna do? That kind of thing. So to get out of that hamster wheel is very important, to breathe deeply, time and space to reflect, meditate, to read deeply was extremely important and life-giving to me. So I came back different than when I left because I finally had the time and space to just be and sort some things out that frankly I didn't have time to sort out when I was doing my job. And so really, really needed it. I think we're instituting it as a every 7-year practice now, which is important. This was the first sabbatical that had ever been granted in this church, and we've been around since 1860. So, kudos to them for letting this happen and blessing me with it and funding it and all that. One thing they did, a sabbatical for a pastor or rabbi is different than an academic sabbatical where you're expected to, produce something. my board was very clear. Your job is to rest, whatever that is for you, whatever it takes. That's the point of it. So we're not expecting you to come back with a book outline or, the next year's teaching cycle figured out and all that. It was just go breathe. They were worried about me because I almost went too far. So I think that month off, kind of mandated by a therapist, kind of woke them up to how important and overdue this thing was, and they just let me do that. Not everybody was cool with it. I'd say 95% of people at the church were all for it, but some, as is to be expected in any human organization, just kind of had an attitude about, well, why do you get this and why don't we, and that kind of a thing. And I understand that. It's a privileged thing, not too many. It's growing, but not too many professions, can even consider this.
Yeah.
But our job is weird.
That's for sure.
And it helps. So I can say my hope and prayer for you is that you will come back deeply refreshed, and that the time away from the rigors of what we do will give you eyes to see, ears to hear, just a different way of re-entering this.
Yeah, thank you. I have just 2 more questions, and then I want to open up the floor. One of the goals of this series of interfaith dialogues, is to expose our community to different faith traditions and different faith leaders who espouse them. Yeah. And we've had Catholic priests, we've had Buddhist monks, we've had a leader in the Muslim community, Episcopalians, Lutherans. You're the first Baptist that we've had, at least that I'm aware of. And I learned a little bit about the difference between the 3 major Baptist denominations when I was an Army chaplain, briefly in the reserves. American Baptist, National Baptist, and Southern Baptist. Could you just very briefly explain to our congregation the difference between those 3 different denominations within the Baptist movement?
Yeah. So First Baptists were renegades in Europe. The First Baptists were called Anabaptists because they got baptized again. So all of them would have been baptized as infants, as Lutherans. But then the printing press came out, and people began reading the Bible for themselves, and a group of Christian people read in our Gospels that people were baptized not as infants, but as people who knew what they were doing. Infant baptism came much later, and really is sort of a neo-circumcision, really to kind of refer back to that same kind of a thing in the Jewish tradition. So these adults decided that they would baptize themselves in Switzerland. And so they did. And word got back to the higher-ups in Lutheranism, and it was not a popular move. They saw it as a direct affront to theology. So they were reprimanded, and many of them were drowned in the very waters that they were baptized in. So there was religious persecution from our own team at that time, and so a number of folks came over and
to the United
States as part of that exodus. Pilgrims, are from largely Quaker, but Baptists kind of grew out of that as well here in the United States. So at first in the United States, you just had Baptists coming from that central place. When the Civil War started to come around, that divided. In fact, the Southern Baptist Convention was created, and a division was made over the question, is it okay for missionaries and pastors to own slaves? And those that said yes became the Southern Baptist Convention. Those that said no became the Northern Baptist Convention, which eventually became the American Baptist Convention. From the American Baptist Convention, the National Baptists were born, which is largely African American. But you see a lot of duly aligned churches, American Baptists and National Baptists. That's still true. Martin Luther King, American Baptists and National Baptists, both. So American Baptist is extremely broad. In Baptist polity, this is sort of a unique thing to Baptists. There's nobody above us in the denomination that can tell us how to do our ministry. So we own our property. We decide as a church what we think we need to be doing. That's a very Baptist thing to do. Southern Baptists are a little different, though, because they own their colleges and they own their seminaries. They can dictate the theology that is taught and allowed at those seminaries. So, very recently, like 2 weeks ago, Southern Baptists disfellowshipped 5 churches, including one of the largest mega churches in Southern California called Saddleback Community Church. Why did they do that? Yeah, Rick Warren, because they had female pastors, and that goes against the teaching of the Southern Baptist Convention. So that's why we got rid of Baptist in our name, or hid it a little bit, because in the news, when you hear Baptist, it is almost always Southern Baptist, and it's almost always conservative and exclusivistic. It's deeply evangelical, which the Southern Baptist Convention literally got together with the Republican Party, I'm not making this up, in the 1930s to create a new way of thinking, to get the church to stop thinking about social issues. That was part of the deal, and to focus more on one's personal spiritual journey. And that developed and developed and developed. Billy Graham was certainly a huge piece of that, and it's still with us today as one of the loudest voices of Christianity that does not represent a lot of us who are trying to walk in the faith. So that's a very brief history.
Yeah, no, that was a
of what
great
we're about.
explication. That's more than I learned, years ago. Final question. I think most of us know, and you can just look here, there are very few people under, the age of 50, very few people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and that's pretty typical in most synagogues around the country, maybe a lot of churches as well. I think at best, Americans and people in the West in general are ambivalent about organized religion, and at worst, they're downright hostile toward it. A lot of people just are not interested in organized institutional religion anymore.
Right.
And that's why sometimes when we're holding worship services, there are thousands more Jews in Napa County than who belong to our congregation. And I'm sure it's the same with you. Where do you see, this is kind of a broad question, but where do you see in the years ahead, when we're retired, and down the line, where do you see your denomination headed, and where do you see religion in America, heading over the next few decades?
Well, the writing's on the wall. All of the stats indicate that there's significant decline as has never been seen in American history. American religiosity peaked in the 1950s and the 1960s. It was much stronger then than it was even like pre-Civil War times. And it was partly stronger because because conservative Christians and the government worked hard to present the idea of "in God we trust." That came in the 1950s as a reaction to the Soviet Union and their atheism. And so that whole thing was born. And so there was this religious fervor happening in America of we're a nation, under God. That was the big thing. But over time, that's waned. And at least in my Baptist heritage, if within the Baptist tradition, and I would say this is true for all Protestant traditions, if they don't figure out a way to make their faith message, experience, community more accessible, it's just a matter of time before it's going to come to an end. Now, the good news is there are pockets here and there. Crosswalk is one of these that has experimented a lot and is trying hard to be that kind of an accessible space. And God is big, and so I think God is going to be working sometimes in spite of religious institutions to do things of God. And so to have an openness to that and to get behind that, is something that will be helpful. But in terms of where it's going, yeah, we're already on the slope toward that, and that's why they brought me to Napa. But I didn't know at that time, just what the stats were looking like. So we're doing the best we can to offer a fresh take, because so many people, like you said, the famous phrase is they're spiritual but not religious. So they believe in something more than flesh and blood, but they have a really bad taste in their mouth for organized religion.
Yeah.
So it's incumbent on us, who want the faith to be expressed more fully and faithfully, to figure out how to help that, because it's not going to happen on its own. Mm-hmm. And we can't berate the people out there for, not having an open mind, and giving us another chance, because how many chances have we blown with them? And the church, at least the Christian church, still, is so exclusivistic, would not condone you and I necessarily having a conversation or a friendship like this, and that's terrible. And I think a lot of the people in the culture are kind of sick of that.
Yeah.
So I don't blame them.
Thank you. Yeah, you and I need to do a better job, and our congregations need to also help us to reach out and engage with people who, are spiritual but not religious.
Yeah.
I want to open up the floor. So Pete is a very thoughtful, analytical guy, probably one of the most thoughtful faith leaders that I've met since I've been in Napa. So this is a great opportunity to ask him some questions. So Kathleen, you're first. And we have people at home, so just make sure you speak into the mic.
Hi.
Hi.
I don't know if your denomination is a creedal kind of Christian, but if it is, how do you get your people beyond the cradle view of it?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. We are a blatantly non-creedal organization, because back in the early days of Baptist thought, remember, it was a creedal expression of Christianity that drowned our ancestors in the faith, right? So we kind of looked at those creeds as becoming potentially idolatrous. However, I have a book this thick, which is called Baptist Confessions of Faith, which is almost exactly the same thing. So we've kind of figured out our own way and called it something different. I think what you're asking is how do you help people really live the faith rather than just know the tenets of the faith? And that's an ongoing challenge. I think saying it out loud, that it's not something we give lip service to or just mental assent to, but it is a way of life. So one of the passages I just referred to it last week. You remember back in the day when you'd watch a football game and you'd see a big 3:16, maybe in the end zone? That's a reference to the Gospel of John, chapter 3, verse 16. Well, there's a word in there about belief, and it's translated from the Greek word. And when we see the word believe, we as Westerners just immediately think, oh, it's just check the box, I believe that, and whatever the thing is. But in the Greek language, it refers to more of a three-legged stool, where mental assent's one part of it, but it's also a passionate thing, an emotional thing, so we actually care about this thing. And then it has to do with our volition and what we do with our hands and our feet. So it's an active thing. So just teaching it so that people know this isn't just something that we say, but it's who we are. It's an ethos. It's a way of life. The earliest Christians were called the people of the way because they got it right. They knew that it was more than just belief statements or creeds. It was, are we known as people, and really, are we known as people of shalom? Are we known as people of love? Because shalom and that very Christian word salvation, my doctorate was in soteriology, which is the study of salvation, study of being saved. And what we call eternal life in Christianity or salvation is exactly what shalom is about in the Jewish tradition. Jesus was Jewish. So, of course, that is going to be a huge part of his life. So just saying it out loud regularly, this is a way of life thing and not just something we believe.
Carla?
So I have just one comment. I'll keep it brief. I was raised Southern Baptist. Okay, so I'm a convert, which in our tradition we don't have to tell people that.
Yeah.
But I was really inspired by your church when I was working for Head Start, because we use the spot and a lot of other things, and I work with animals, and Jameson comes to your church and does things.
Yep.
That was not my experience as a child.
Yeah.
So you gave me a little bit more faith in the Baptist, quote unquote, religion when I had those different experiences. So I thank you for that, because now I know that that was your doing.
Well, not me, but all right, yeah.
Well, your community.
Yeah.
That you're the leader of, right?
Yeah.
So the other thing is I've noticed that you have a school, a preschool on
We
your
do.
campus, and I just wondered how that, if it is faith-based preschool, and how that works with your community.
Yeah, it's not a faith-based preschool. Actually, there was a preschool before a place of our own, or my own, and they were, this is kind of a classic crosswalk, yes. They were getting kicked out or losing their lease on whatever property they were in, and they were stuck. And so they just came to us desperate, and we're like, okay, yeah, well, let's help you work this thing out, because child care is really needed in Napa. So they came in, and eventually that one shifted out, and a place of my own came in. So we share the space together. So our kids play on their playground. They're in our space. We have a very good, tight relationship where we support each other, but it's not faith-based. If it was faith-based, it would be built in the same way that our children's ministry is, which is a very inclusive theology, which I think is what the original thing was all about. Extremely inclusive. I'm teaching about that this week, in fact. So the way we approach it would be as far removed from your experience as a child as can be imagined. And that's the way it should be, I think.
We'll give you the final question.
I just wanted to return to the idea of the decline in attendance and religiousness in our society. There's probably a multitude of reasons why it happened over the 50s, during the 50s and 60s and 70s. But I wonder what your thoughts are about the pendulum swinging the other way. Recently, there's been several instances of spontaneous prayer assemblies.
Asbury, right? That community, Asbury.
And in a couple of other places too.
Yep.
And it just seems like we are at a point right now in our world where people feel very dislocated, a sense of unease, and a searching for something that will heal and bring people together and make things work better. And I'm just wondering about your thoughts about that.
Yeah, and thank you for the reminder, because I think I was a little bit too gloomy on the one hand. The really good news is you're right, and this has been true throughout time, that while things may be running amok and maybe, the greatest numbers, there's still remnants, that remember and come together. And within Christianity, that's certainly true. Back in the mid to late 90s, it was called the Emerging Church, and it was a group of pastors mostly that were emerging out of a more conservative Christianity, taking issue with some of those positions and saying, we think there's a different way to think about this. And that is a growing movement globally. And Crosswalk's a part of that. And the good news is, Crosswalk is growing, and that's a very positive thing. And the positive thing about that is it's growing with people that are hungering for more than the lip service or more than the dogma. And so I think when congregations are able to articulate that and create space for that, people are hungry to develop this thing they call their spirituality. I think they really want help and are looking for religion to do what religion is supposed to do. Richard Rohr, who is a Franciscan friar, he reminds us that religion means to religament, to bring things back together. And in the faith tradition, we have so much opportunity and a mandate to help people put things back together in a meaningful way. The challenge is that many people have looked at religion and said, well, you've done the opposite of religamenting, you've torn apart. And so where faith communities can say boldly and powerfully and effectively, there's something to put back together here. I think there's great hunger for that deconstruction, reconstruction process, that's going on everywhere. And so it may not look like the Christianity or the faith communities of yesteryear where every church is full. That's going back to the late 50s and 60s. Those days I don't think are going to stick around. Even though you're still going to see mega churches here and there, I'm not really confident that that's how it's going to stay because I think people want a more genuine, relational community kind of experience that is deeply rooted in their practice and their belonging to something else. So thus the prayer things that pop up and all that. So it's hopeful on the one hand because I think the Spirit of God is at work always, and people do respond to that. But there is some gloominess because probably what needed to fade is fading, and that's okay.
I thought that was the final word, but Benjamin has another final question.
Well, with a name like Benjamin, yeah.
Another,
I'm a OB/GYN.
can you just put it to your, just hold it up there, close to your mouth. Yeah.
I'm a OB/GYN, and I want to know how women are integrated in your church, in the pastoral and in the all the day work. And also the other minorities. Are you changing the view that you are allowing them to participate in your church and bring them in?
Yeah, from a deeply theological space, we have made it as clear as possible, as clear as we know how to, from our website to signage as you're coming in, although the sign just blew over in the windstorm a couple weeks ago, but that's another thing, that we are fully inclusive. And by inclusion, it's not all are welcome until you get in the door, then it's a bait and switch, but really, everybody really is welcome and treated equally. And that equality goes all the way to the top. So our executive pastor is a woman, former chair of the board last cycle is a young gay man with brown skin, which is wonderful. And when I retire, who knows? Yeah, but it's open to literally anybody. And that is a massive change in this church's history that I'm really proud of because we live up to it. In fact, the young man that was the chair of our board, he started coming to our church because the mega church he was a part of wouldn't accept him as a member because he was gay. And they heard that we were potentially open, so he and his friend, who would later become his husband, that I married, they came with their guard up, and their first question is, are we really, equal here? Do you really mean it? And when they found out that we really mean it, and we surrounded them with love, that made all the difference for them. So they're part of us, and we really mean it. American Baptists are really broad. So I would say, for the most part, Baptists are going to be on the conservative side in general. So even within American Baptists, the good news is when I married that couple, when I announced to my executive minister, because I was on staff with the region at that time, that I was going to marry this couple, he immediately fired me from my role. I used to oversee all the pastors getting together in Northern California for fellowship and support. And he also told me, if you don't take your church out of our region, we're going to kick your church out of our region. So we found a different region that's based in Seattle. It's called Evergreen, that is wonderful and open and inclusive. And within American Baptists, there are 35, 36 regions, and I think 3 to 4 of those are truly inclusive and welcoming. So we have a long way to go, even with women, you know, on the books, we're equal. That doesn't necessarily mean that women are going to have the same shot at the same churches, and particularly rural parts of the country. It's just, that's time, and there's no way, because the way Baptist polity works, there's no way to really force that forward, except to, as much as we can, to support when we can. So,
Pete, I want to thank you on behalf of our congregation for coming tonight.
Thank you.
You have just reaffirmed for me all the things about you that I love. Forward-thinking, deep thinker, very analytical, yet with a core spiritual heart. And I am just so grateful that you came here tonight. Oneg in Hebrew means joy. And we have an oneg waiting for us in a couple seconds. It's basically wine and food. It's a reception.
Wonderful.
So there are two blessings we say before that. I'm going to ask everyone to stand for this. And why don't you stay here with us? The first blessing is over wine, because wine is associated with joyous occasions in Judaism and in other traditions as well. So please join me in the Kiddush. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Amen. L'chaim.
L'chaim.
And the next blessing is called the motzi, and this is a blessing over bread. There's a special bread we eat on Shabbat called challah. And while it's a blessing over bread, we do it as sort of a catch-all blessing for the food that's waiting for us. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Okay.
Thanks, my friend.
Thank you.